Well, Rick Sullivan here, and welcome back to another episode of the NASDUCK podcast. I was sitting in my office yesterday, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, and I started thinking about all the bullshit I witnessed during my 20 years on Wall Street, and today, I want to tell you about the one investment strategy that makes these pinstriped parasites absolutely lose their minds. We're talking about index funds, folks, and why they represent the closest thing to a revolution that your average working American is going to see in their lifetime. Now, before we dive in, let me set the record straight about something. I spent 2 decades in the belly of the beast, watching how this game really works. I've seen billion-dollar firms manipulate markets, I've watched fund managers buy their third vacation home while their clients' portfolios burned, and I've witnessed more financial fraud than you'd see in a Martin Scorsese movie. And you know what the dirtiest secret is? The whole damn system is designed to separate you from your money, 1 percentage point at a time. But here's the beautiful irony. The solution to beating Wall Street at their own game is so stupidly simple that they can't figure out how to stop it. It's called index fund investing, and it's essentially the financial equivalent of the Trojan horse. We're going to use their own system to build wealth for regular people, and there's not a damn thing they can do about it. Let me tell you a story that'll make your blood boil. Last month, I got a call from my neighbor, Frank. Good guy, works construction, saves every penny he can. He tells me his financial advisor just moved him into some hot new mutual fund with a catchy name and a slick brochure. I ask him what he's paying in fees. Frank says, "Oh, it's nothing much, just 1.5%. 1.5%. Just typing those numbers makes me want to punch a wall." I sat Frank down and did the math with him. He's 45, putting away $2,000 a month for retirement. With his fancy mutual fund charging 1.5% annually, he's going to pay over $700,000 in fees by the time he retires. $700,000. That's more than most people make in their entire working careers, just vanishing into some fund manager's pocket. Meanwhile, if Frank had put that same money into a simple S&P 500 index fund charging 0.04% annually, he'd pay about $40,000 in fees over the same period. The difference? $660,000. That's the sound of freedom. That's the difference between retiring comfortably and working until you drop dead. But here's what really pisses me off about this whole setup. Frank's advisor knew exactly what he was doing. These people aren't stupid. They're predators in expensive suits, and they've turned retirement planning into their personal ATM machine. Now, you might be thinking, Rick, surely these expensive funds must be delivering better returns to justify those fees, right? Wrong, dead wrong, and I've got the numbers to prove it. The latest data from 2024 shows that 65% of actively managed large-cap funds couldn't even beat the S&P 500. 65%. These are supposed to be the smartest guys in the room with their Ivy League MBAs and their fancy algorithms, and they're getting beaten by a simple index that just owns everything and sits there doing nothing. But it gets worse. When you look at longer time periods, the failure rate becomes almost comical. Over 20 years, nearly 2/3 of domestic stock funds either underperformed so badly they got shut down or they were quietly merged into other funds to hide the evidence. You know what we should call them? Graveyards. Graveyards filled with the financial dreams of millions of Americans who trusted the experts. Now, even when these funds do well for a year or two, they can't keep it up. The data shows that among all the top performing funds in 2020, not a single one stayed in the top quartile over the next 4 years. Not one! You'd have better luck picking winners at the dog track. This isn't incompetence, folks. This is the system working exactly as designed. Wall Street makes money whether you do or not. In fact, they often make more money when you don't, because confused and scared investors tend to trade more, generating more fees. Let me share something with you that they definitely don't want you to know. There's a study that comes out every year called the DALBAR report, and it measures the difference between what investments return and what investors actually earn. In 2024, while the S&P 500 returned over 25%, the average equity investor earned just 16.5%. That's an 8-point gap, which might not sound like much until you realize that over 30 years, that gap represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost wealth. Why does this happen? because the financial industry has spent billions of dollars conditioning you to believe that investing is complicated, that you need experts, that you need to constantly buy and sell and adjust and optimize. It's all garbage designed to generate transactions because every transaction puts money in their pockets and takes it out of yours. The truth is much simpler and much more beautiful. The best investment strategy is also the most boring one. Buy a broad market index fund, put money in it every month, and then ignore it for decades. That's it. No stock picking, no market timing, no expensive advisors. Just steady, methodical wealth building that harnesses the most powerful force in the universe, compound interest. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, but Rick, what about all those success stories we hear about? What about Warren Buffett? What about those hedge fund managers making billions? Let me tell you something about Warren Buffett. The man is brilliant, no question. But he's also the first to tell you that regular investors should stick to index funds. In fact, he's so confident in this advice that he made a $1 million bet in 2008 that an S&P 500 index fund would outperform a collection of hedge funds over 10 years. Guess what happened? He won by a landslide. As for those hedge fund managers making billions, sure, some of them exist. But for everyone that succeeds, there are hundreds that fail, and their failures are quietly buried. While the media focuses on the occasional winner, it's survival bias in action, and it's designed to keep you believing in a fairy tale. Here's what really happened when I started digging into the hedge fund industry. These guys charge what they call 2 and 20. That's 2% of your money every year, plus 20% of any profits. So if they make you 10% in a year, they keep 4% and you get 6%. If they lose money, well, you lose money and they still get their 2%. It's like paying someone to gamble with your retirement. Except the house always wins, and the house is them. But let's talk about something even more sinister: the concentration of power in the asset management industry. 3 companies, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, control nearly 3/4 of the entire equity ETF market. In other words, it's control over the American economy. Now, the apologists will tell you this isn't a problem because these companies don't actually own the stocks. They're just holding them for millions of individual investors. And technically that's true, but here's what they don't tell you. These companies vote the shares on behalf of those investors, which means they have unprecedented influence over corporate America. Think about that for a minute. A handful of unelected executives, accountable to nobody but their shareholders, effectively control the voting power of most major American corporations. They decide executive compensation, they influence corporate strategy, they shape environmental and social policies. And most of the people whose money gives them this power have no idea it's happening. This is what happens when you let capitalism run unchecked for decades. Power concentrates, markets become less competitive, and regular people get squeezed from every direction. The big get bigger, the rich get richer, and everybody else fights for scraps. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm cautiously optimistic about index funds, despite everything I just told you. These massive asset managers actually have an incentive to keep fees low and performance high because they're competing with each other for your business. Vanguard, in particular, has a unique structure where it's owned by its fund shareholders, which means they have no incentive to gouge you on fees. This is probably the closest thing to a worker-owned enterprise that most Americans will ever encounter, and they don't even realize it. When you invest in a Vanguard index fund, you're becoming a part owner of the fund company itself. It's a little taste of what an economy could look like if it were actually designed to serve working people instead of just enriching the already wealthy. Now let me give you some practical advice that'll save you hundreds of thousands of dollars over your investing lifetime. First, forget everything you think you know about investing. Forget about picking individual stocks. Forget about trying to time the market. Forget about following the talking heads on financial television. All of that is entertainment designed to make you feel smart while making you poor. Instead, here's what you do. Open an account with a low-cost provider like Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab. Put your money into a broad market index fund like the Total Stock Market Index or the S&P 500 Index. If you want to get a little fancier, add some international exposure with a total international stock index fund. Set up automatic investments so money goes in every month without you having to think about it. And then, and this is the hardest part, ignore it. Don't check your balance every day. Don't panic when the market drops. Don't get excited when it soars. Just let compound interest do its magic. Here's why this works and why it drives Wall Street absolutely insane. When you buy an index fund, you're essentially buying a tiny piece of every major company in America. You own a slice of Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Tesla, and hundreds of others. You're betting that American businesses will continue to grow and innovate and create value over time. And historically, that's been a pretty good bet. The S&P 500 has averaged about 10% annual returns since 1926. That means your money doubles every 7 years. Put in $100,000 at age 35, and by the time you're 65, it's worth over $800,000, assuming you never add another penny. But here's the beautiful part. You're not just building wealth for yourself. Every dollar you put into index funds instead of expensive mutual funds is a dollar that Wall Street can't skim off the top. Every person who chooses indexing over active management is a vote against the whole predatory system. It's not going to overthrow capitalism overnight, but it's a start. It's a way for regular people to participate in the growth of the economy without getting fleeced by middlemen who add no value but charge you for the privilege of underperforming. Now, I want to address something that's been bothering me lately. There's this narrative out there that young people are screwed, that they'll never be able to build wealth like previous generations. And while it's true that the deck is stacked against them in many ways, student loans, housing costs, stagnant wages, the stock market is actually one area where they have a huge advantage. Time is the most powerful wealth-building tool in existence, and young people have more of it than anyone else. A 25-year-old who puts just $200 a month into an index fund will likely be a millionaire by retirement, assuming historical market returns. That's what the math says. But here's what pisses me off. Instead of teaching young people about this incredible opportunity, our education system and our media fill their heads with fear and complexity. They're told investing is risky, that they need to wait until they're older, that they need thousands of dollars to get started. It's all lies designed to keep them dependent on expensive financial services later in life. The truth is, investing has never been easier or cheaper. You can start with $50 and add to it whenever you can. There are no minimums, no account fees, no penalties for starting small. The only requirement is time, and young people have that in abundance. I remember when I first started on Wall Street in the 90s, online trading was just becoming a thing, and the minimum investment for most mutual funds was thousands of dollars. The fees were outrageous, the choices were limited, and individual investors were treated like second-class citizens. Today, thanks to technology and competition, you can build a globally diversified portfolio with a few clicks and fees lower than anything we could have imagined back then. This is progress, folks, real progress that benefits regular people at the expense of financial industry profits. And it happened not because of government regulation or corporate conscience, but because technology made it possible and competition made it necessary. Let me tell you about another aspect of this whole thing that really gets under my skin: the tax situation. See, when you buy and sell stocks individually, or when you invest in actively managed funds that trade constantly, you generate what are called capital gains. And the government wants their cut of those gains every single year. But index funds, because they just buy and hold, rarely sell anything. That means you can own an index fund for decades and never owe a penny in capital gains taxes until you decide to sell. It's like getting an interest-free loan from the government that compounds for your entire investing lifetime. Do you think your financial advisor mentions this when he's trying to sell you on that hot new growth fund that trades stocks like a Vegas blackjack dealer? Of course not. Because if you understood the tax implications of their recommended strategy, you'd realize you're paying more than their fees. You're also paying Uncle Sam a hefty premium for the privilege of underperforming the market. This is what I mean when I say the system is rigged. Every incentive, every rule, every cultural norm around investing is designed to extract money from your pocket and put it into someone else's. The tax code favors frequent trading over patient investing. The media celebrates speculation over prudence. The financial industry promotes complexity over simplicity. But index funds cut through all of that nonsense. They're tax efficient, low cost, and effective. They turn investing from a game where the house always wins into a cooperative venture where everyone benefits from economic growth. Now, let me address some of the common objections I hear when I talk about this stuff. But Rick, people say, what if the market crashes? What if we have another 2008? Fair question. Market crashes happen. They're painful, they're scary, and they wipe out trillions of dollars in paper wealth. But here's what the fearmongers don't tell you. Every single market crash in American history has been followed by a recovery that took markets to new highs. Every single one. The key is having the emotional fortitude to stay invested during the bad times. And that's actually easier with index funds than with individual stocks or active funds, because you're not constantly second-guessing specific investment decisions. You're not wondering if your fund manager has lost his touch or if that biotech stock you bought is going to zero. You're just holding a piece of the entire American economy, confident that over time, innovation and productivity will drive growth. I lived through the 2008 financial crisis, and let me tell you, it was terrifying even for someone with 2 decades of Wall Street experience. I watched portfolios get cut in half. I saw grown men cry at their desks. I witnessed the near collapse of the entire global financial system. But I also saw what happened next. Patient investors who stayed the course not only recovered their losses, but went on to enjoy one of the greatest bull markets in history. The people who panicked and sold at the bottom, they locked in their losses and missed the recovery. Many of them never got back into the market, and they're still working today instead of enjoying retirement. Here's another objection I hear. Index funds are boring. Where's the excitement? Where's the potential for big wins? You know what's exciting? Financial independence. You know what's exciting? Being able to retire early because you didn't piss away your savings chasing the latest investment fad. You know what's exciting? Watching your net worth grow steadily year after year without having to stress about whether your stock picks are working out. If you want excitement, go to Vegas. If you want wealth, buy index funds and wait. But let me tell you what's really exciting about index fund investing. It's democratic in a way that most investment strategies aren't. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO or a janitor, if you have an MBA from Harvard or a GED from night school. The strategy works exactly the same for everyone. Put money in, leave it alone, get rich slowly. That's revolutionary in a society where almost every other path to wealth requires either inheritance, exceptional talent, or willingness to exploit other people. Index fund investing is the great equalizer. It's proof that you don't need to be born rich to die rich. And here's something else that gives me hope. The growth of index fund investing is forcing the entire financial industry to evolve. Fees across the board are coming down as companies compete for market share. Financial advisors are shifting from stock pickers to actual advisors who help with comprehensive financial planning. Even the old-school Wall Street firms are launching their own low-cost index products. It's not perfect, and there's still way too much wealth concentration at the top, but it's progress. It's proof that when regular people vote with their wallets, even the most entrenched industries have to change. Now let me get into some of the nitty-gritty details that can make a real difference in your long-term results. Asset allocation is probably the most important decision you'll make as an investor, and it's also one of the simplest. When you're young, you want to be heavily weighted towards stocks, because you have decades for them to grow. As you get older, you gradually shift toward bonds to preserve the wealth you've built. A simple rule of thumb is to subtract your age from 120, and that's the percentage you should have in stocks. So if you're 30, you'd have 90% stocks and 10% bonds. If you're 60, you'd have 60% stocks and 40% bonds. It's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than the random portfolios most people end up with. For the stock portion, I recommend keeping it simple. A total stock market index fund gives you exposure to virtually every publicly traded company in America. Add an international index fund for some geographic diversification. That's it. Don't overthink it. For bonds, stick with a total bond market index fund that holds government and corporate bonds of various maturities. Again, simple and effective. Rebalancing is another key concept that most people screw up. As markets move, your target allocation will drift. If stocks do well, you'll end up with more than your target percentage. If bonds outperform, the opposite happens. Once or twice a year, you sell some of whatever has done well and buy more of whatever has lagged to get back to your target allocation. This forces you to sell high and buy low, which is exactly what successful investing is about. And it's completely mechanical. No emotion, no guessing, no trying to predict what happens next. Here's something most financial advisors won't tell you because it reduces their importance. If you're investing in tax-advantaged accounts like 401ks and IRAs, you can probably handle your entire investment strategy with 3 or 4 index funds. That's it. No need for complicated strategies, no need for regular check-ins, no need to pay someone thousands of dollars a year to manage what amounts to a simple mathematical formula. But let's talk about one area where things get a bit more complex: taxable investment accounts. If you're maxing out your 401k and IRA contributions and still have money to invest, you'll be dealing with taxes on dividends and capital gains. This is where index funds really shine. Because they trade so infrequently, they generate very few taxable events. You can own an index fund for decades and your only tax bill will be on the dividends, which for most broad market index funds is less than 2% annually. Compare that to an actively managed fund that might turn over its entire portfolio every year, generating capital gains that you have to pay taxes on even if you never sold a single share. Over 30 years, the tax difference alone can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's also something called tax loss harvesting that can help in taxable accounts. When one of your holdings loses value, you can sell it to realize the loss for tax purposes, then immediately buy a similar but not identical investment to maintain your market exposure. The tax loss can offset gains from other investments or reduce your regular income taxes. It sounds complicated, but technology has made it much easier. Companies like Betterment and Wealthfront will handle tax loss harvesting automatically for a small fee. Even Vanguard and Fidelity offer similar services now. Speaking of technology, let me talk about something that's been bothering me lately. There's this trend toward what they call robo-advisors, automated investment services that use algorithms to manage your portfolio. Some people love them, some people hate them, and most people don't understand them. Here's my take. For most people, especially those just starting out, robo-advisors are fine. They'll build you a diversified portfolio of index funds, rebalance automatically, and handle tax loss harvesting. The fees are reasonable, usually around 0.25% annually, which is way better than traditional financial advisors who might charge 1% or more. But here's the thing, once you understand the basics of index fund investing, you don't really need a robo-advisor. You can build the same portfolio yourself for even lower costs. The robo-advisor is training wheels, useful while you're learning, but eventually you might want to take them off. The bigger concern I have with robo-advisors is that they're still part of the financial services industry, which means they have an incentive to make investing seem more complicated than it really is. Some of them push more complex strategies or additional services that aren't necessary for most investors. But compared to traditional financial advisors who make their money by keeping you confused and dependent, robo-advisors are definitely a step in the right direction. Now let me address something that's become a hot topic in recent years: ESG investing. That stands for environmental, social, and governance. And it's the idea that you should consider more than just financial returns when choosing investments. This is a tricky area because it intersects with politics, values, and investment performance in ways that make people uncomfortable. Some folks want their investments to reflect their values, even if it might cost them some returns. Others think mixing politics with investing is a recipe for disaster. Here's my perspective as someone who's seen how corporate America really operates. Most ESG investing is marketing bullshit designed to make you feel good while paying higher fees for similar performance. The companies that market themselves as socially responsible are often just as profit-driven and morally questionable as everyone else. They're just better at public relations. But here's the thing, if ESG investing helps you stay invested for the long term because it aligns with your values, then it might be worth it even if the fees are slightly higher. The biggest mistake investors make is not staying invested, so anything that helps with that is probably worthwhile. Want to hear my advice? If you want to pursue ESG investing, do it with a small portion of your portfolio and make sure you understand what you're paying for. Don't let values-based investing become an excuse to abandon the fundamental principles of low-cost, diversified, index fund investing. Let me shift gears and talk about something that really pisses me off: the retirement crisis in America. We've created a system where individuals are responsible for funding their own retirement through 401k plans and IRAs, but we've done almost nothing to educate them about how to do it successfully. The result is predictable. Most Americans are woefully undersaved for retirement. The median 401k balance for people nearing retirement is less than $150,000, which would provide maybe $6,000 a year in retirement income. That's a recipe for working until you die. But here's the maddening part. The solution is sitting right there in front of them. If someone starts investing $200 a month in index funds at age 25 and increases that amount by 3% annually, they'll have over $1 million by age 65. $1 million from what amounts to skipping a few restaurant meals each month when you're young. Why doesn't this happen? Because we've created a culture that worships consumption over savings, immediate gratification over delayed gratification. We've convinced people that they need the latest iPhone, the biggest SUV, the fanciest vacation, all while their future selves are heading for poverty. And the financial industry, instead of educating people about simple, effective strategies, profits from their confusion and fear. They sell complex annuities with surrender charges, overpriced life insurance that mixes investing with insurance, and managed accounts that generate fees regardless of performance. It's criminal, really. We're allowing an entire generation to reach retirement age without the resources they need to maintain their dignity and independence. And we're doing it while the tools for building wealth have never been more accessible or affordable. This is where I get really angry about the whole system. We have the technology, we have the knowledge, we have the investment products to solve the retirement crisis tomorrow. But instead, we have an industry built around keeping people confused and dependent, and a culture that prioritizes short-term pleasure over long-term security. What gives me hope is that young people are starting to figure this out on their own. They're using social media to share information about investing, they're questioning the old rules about financial advice, and they're embracing simple, low-cost strategies in ways that their parents never did. The FIRE movement, Financial Independence, Retire Early, is basically index fund investing on steroids. These are people who live below their means, invest aggressively in index funds, and plan to retire in their 30s or 40s. They're proving that financial independence isn't just for trust fund babies or lottery winners. Listen, I'm not saying everyone should try to retire at 35, but the principles of the FIRE movement, live below your means, invest early and often, focus on net worth instead of income, are sound for everyone. What I love about the FIRE movement is it's completely subversive to consumer capitalism. These people are opting out of the spend, borrow, spend cycle that keeps most Americans trapped in financial mediocrity. They're choosing freedom over stuff, and they're using the tools of capitalism to buy their way out of the rat race. That's revolutionary thinking disguised as personal finance advice. Something else that bugs me is the mythology around real estate investing. Don't get me wrong, owning your home can be a good financial move, especially if you buy something modest and stay in it for a long time. But this idea that real estate is the path to riches for regular people is mostly nonsense. First, real estate is expensive to buy and sell. Between realtor commissions, closing costs, inspections, and repairs, you're looking at 10% or more of the property value just to complete a transaction. Compare that to buying an index fund, where the cost is essentially zero. Second, real estate requires ongoing maintenance, property taxes, insurance, and management. When you own stocks through an index fund, You don't have to worry about the roof leaking at Apple headquarters or whether Amazon is paying their property taxes. Third, real estate is concentrated risk. When you buy a rental property, you're betting on one specific location, one specific type of property, one specific local economy. When you buy an index fund, you're spreading your risk across hundreds or thousands of companies in different industries and regions. Finally, the biggest problem with real estate investing for most people is that it's simply time intensive and management intensive in ways that stock investing isn't. Being a landlord is a part-time job, and it's often a shitty job dealing with tenant problems, maintenance issues, and legal complications. Some people love real estate investing and are good at it. Great, more power to them. But for most people, especially those with full-time careers and families, index fund investing is a much simpler path to building wealth. The real estate industry, like the financial services industry, has a vested interest in making their product seem more attractive than it really is. They'll show you charts about how real estate has outperformed stocks over certain time periods, but they'll conveniently ignore transaction costs, taxes, maintenance, and the opportunity cost of the time spent managing properties. When you account for all the hidden costs and time commitments, real estate investing often underperforms simple index fund investing on a risk-adjusted basis. And it's way more stressful. Here's my advice on real estate. Buy a home if you want to own a home, not because you think it's a great investment. If you want to invest in real estate, buy a REIT index fund that gives you exposure to hundreds of properties managed by professionals. You'll get the diversification benefits without the headaches. Another sacred cow that needs to be slaughtered is the 401k system. Don't get me wrong, if your employer offers a 401k match, you should absolutely take advantage of it. Free money's free money. But the whole system just proves to how we've shifted risk from institutions to individuals while pretending it's empowerment. 30 years ago, most workers had pensions. They showed up, did their jobs, and their employer guaranteed them a specific monthly income in retirement. The investment risk was on the employer, not the employee. If the pension fund had a bad year, the company had to make up the difference. But pensions were expensive for employers, especially as people started living longer. So corporate America came up with a brilliant solution: convince workers that managing their own retirement investments was actually better for them. Give them some tax benefits and a small company match and call it empowerment. So instead of guaranteed retirement income, workers have accounts that go up and down with the market. Instead of professional money managers handling investments, you've got factory workers and teachers trying to figure out asset allocation and rebalancing. It's a massive transfer of risk from institutions that could handle it to individuals who mostly can't. And the financial services industry loves it because it created millions of new customers who need investment products and advice. The irony in all this is that if workers actually understood index fund investing and applied it consistently in their 401k accounts, they'd probably end up better off than they would have with traditional pensions. The problem is that most people don't understand it, and the financial industry has little incentive to educate them properly. So you end up with 401k accounts stuffed with overpriced mutual funds, inappropriate asset allocations, and emotional investment decisions that destroy long-term returns. The system could work, but it's designed to benefit fund companies more than workers. This is where I get really frustrated with America these days. We've created a system that privatizes profits and socializes risks. When things go well, corporations and fund managers get rich. When things go badly, workers lose their retirement security. But again, index fund investing offers a way to game this rigged system. By keeping costs low and emotions in check, workers can actually thrive in the 401k system despite its flaws. But the index fund industry itself is not perfect. Remember when I talked about the concentration of power in companies like BlackRock and Vanguard? Well, that concentration is creating some unintended consequences that we need to think about. When the same institutional investors own large stakes in competing companies, it can reduce competition. Why would BlackRock, as a major shareholder in both Coca-Cola and Pepsi, want them to compete aggressively on price? It would just reduce profits for both companies, which would hurt BlackRock's returns. There's academic research suggesting that this kind of common ownership is leading to higher prices and lower wages across the economy. It's a form of soft monopolization that happens without anyone explicitly agreeing to reduce competition. This is what happens when you let market concentration go unchecked. Even something as beneficial as low-cost index funds can have negative side effects when a few players control too much of the market. I'm not saying this should stop you from investing in index funds. The benefits still far outweigh the costs for individual investors. But it's something we need to keep an eye on as a society. Maybe we need more players in the index fund space, or maybe we need regulations that limit how much of any single company these giant fund managers can own. The point is, just because index funds are great for individual investors doesn't mean they're perfect for the economy as a whole. We need to think systemically about the long-term consequences of current trends, and this brings me to something that should keep people up at night. The way our economic system is evolving, with more and more wealth concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, is not sustainable. We're creating a society where a small elite owns everything and everyone else works for them. Index funds, ironically, are part of this trend. When regular people buy index funds, they're becoming shareholders in the companies that employ them. On one level, that's great, workers sharing in the profits of the businesses they help create. But on another level, it's a way of pacifying workers by giving them a tiny stake in the system that's exploiting them. Think about it. If you work for a company and you're also a shareholder through your index fund, are you going to fight as hard for higher wages? Are you going to support unions and worker rights with the same enthusiasm? Maybe not, because higher wages mean lower profits, which means lower returns on your index fund. Behold the genius of modern capitalism. It co-opts potential opposition by giving everyone a small stake in the system. How can you fight the machine when you own a piece of it, even if it's a tiny piece? Again, I'm not telling you to avoid index funds because of these broader concerns. In the system we have right now, index fund investing is still the best strategy for building wealth if you're not already rich. These days, the alternative is to stay poor while the wealthy get richer. What I am saying is that we need to think bigger. We need to ask whether a system that requires everyone to gamble their retirement security on the stock market is really the best we can do. We need to consider whether extreme wealth concentration is compatible with democracy and human dignity. But until we figure out those bigger questions, you still need to take care of yourself and your family, and that means understanding how money works in the system we have, not the system we wish we had. Okay, enough preaching. Let me give you some final thoughts on building an index fund portfolio that will serve you well regardless of what happens in the broader economy. I've got a list of 6 points here. First, remember to start with the basics. Total stock market index fund for your core equity exposure. Total international index fund for geographic diversification. Total bond market index fund for stability as you get older. That's 90% of what you need to know. Point 2, keep costs low. If you're paying more than 0.20% annually for any index fund, you're paying too much. The major providers, Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, all offer excellent index funds with expense ratios below 0.1%. Point 3, automate everything. Set up automatic investments so money goes into your accounts every month without you having to think about it. Set up automatic rebalancing so your asset allocation stays on target. The less you have to actively manage, the better your results will be. 4, ignore the noise. Financial media exists to generate advertising revenue, not to help you build wealth. The daily market commentary, the predictions about where stocks are headed, the hot tips from experts. It's all entertainment that will make you a worse investor if you pay attention to it. Point 5, stay the course. There will be market crashes. There will be recessions. There will be times when you question whether this strategy is working. That's when it's most important to stick with the plan. The investors who get rich are the ones who stay invested through the bad times. And finally, remember why you're doing this. You're not trying to get rich quick or beat some benchmark or impress your friends with your investment prowess. You're trying to build financial security so you can live life on your own terms instead of someone else's. That's the real prize. Not just money, but freedom. Why worry about every market fluctuation? You need freedom from depending on an employer's goodwill for your security and freedom from the fear that dominates most people's relationship with money. Index fund investing is a philosophy of patience. Patient wealth building happens to work better than anything else most people will ever try. It's proof that sometimes the simplest solution really is the best solution. And in a world that profits from keeping you confused and scared and dependent, choosing simplicity and patience and self-reliance is a radical act. You're taking control of your financial future instead of letting someone else control it for you. That might not sound revolutionary, but it is. Every person who chooses index funds over expensive mutual funds is voting against the predatory practices of the financial industry. Every dollar that goes into low-cost index funds instead of high-cost active funds is a dollar that can't be skimmed off by middlemen. Multiply that by millions of investors over decades, and you're talking about trillions of dollars staying in the pockets of regular people instead of flowing to Wall Street parasites. That's personal finance, sure, but it's also economic justice. So that's my message for today. The system is rigged, but not in the way most people think. It's rigged in favor of complexity over simplicity, activity over patience, fear over confidence. But once you understand the game, you can use the rules to your advantage. Buy index funds, ignore the experts, stay the course, get rich slowly, and maybe help build a better world in the process. That has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? This is Rick Sullivan reminding you that the best revenge against a rigged system is your own success. Until next time, keep building that wealth, and remember, every percentage point you don't pay in fees is a percentage point that compounds for your future. That's a wrap for today's NASDUCK podcast. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, in a world designed to separate you from your money, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is just keep it.